Do you want me to?
My phone there, I can see the time, that's all. Right.
Okay. Welcome everybody to this Ascalite Business Education 6 webinar. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the country from where we all are joining today. So I'm joining from the land of Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I am the SIG lead for Ascalite Business Education SIG, and we started our SIG in 2019 in Singapore. Thank you, Elaine. And it would be good if you all can acknowledge the countries from where you're joining, people from where you're joining today. So we started our SIG because we felt there was a dearth of kind of forums where business educators could talk about scholarly approaches to technology enhanced teaching and learning. And we felt we really wanted a collective voice where we can influence colleagues and we can get more journals which focus on technology enhanced teaching and learning kind of publications in the ABDC list as well. So with that in mind, we started our community and soon it's grown to a very vibrant SIG. We've got more than 50 colleagues in our SIG joining from Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Africa, and quite a few countries. And the best part of our SIG is that everybody actually contributes quite significantly, and we have a very robust, very kind of active steering committee. One of them is Brent Gregory, who's one of the co-hosts today. And it's not like one man show or one person show, one woman show. It's like everybody keeps contributing and things organically keep happening. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our presenters today. We've got with us Associate Professor Elaine Huber, who leads the University of Sydney Business School's CoDesign unit. She leads a team of 30 members that include educational developers, digital learning designers, and technologists, media producers, student interns, and educational evaluators. So her design unit collaborates with large cohort unit coordinators to redesign the delivery of their units. In her presentation, Elaine will discuss their journey, which is supported by large strategic project funding. The funding's called Connected Learning at Scale, and provide examples of innovations based on 3 guiding principles: connecting with discipline knowledge, connecting with peers through active and collaborative learning, and connecting with society through authentic assessment. And today's presentation will commence with Brent Gregory, who's on our steering committee, who's a steering committee member and actively contributes to our SIG activities. He was responsible for introductory accounting units at the University of New England. He structured those units to facilitate scalable personalization, and he's also received an AUT citation award for that. And Brent had no budget, and so took a more basic approach targeted more at the low-hanging fruit. This presentation will display a continuum from state-of-the-art to low cost and provide a framework and examples for you to consider your approach to a more effective delivery of large cohort units. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Brent. Over to you, Brent.
Thank you very much, Harsh. It's greatly appreciated the introduction, and also thank you for Elaine for working with me on this. I'll add one thing to what Harsh says before I move on here. Since I started down the process of when Elaine and I first talked about the presentation, I've in fact retired, and that's probably changed my focus a little. As I was talking to Harsh a bit earlier, there was lots of things I wanted to do work-wise when I, that I didn't have time for while I was fully engaged with my teaching. But I've got to say I felt very relaxed about not doing those things. Another thing that probably retirement does is I spend a lot more time exercising and a bit more time in the garden. And I had a wander in the garden this morning and decided I was going to have a real change in focus on what I did this afternoon. And I'll probably take a lot more practical focus. Instead of the overview, I think I should just drill down and find, here's a really, just one small area. Here is an example of, in fact, what I did. So I might not totally, I just want to share now. I can share, hold on. Share, righto. So I will work through just a few PowerPoints in my slide. I clearly won't go through everything that I first put together. One thing that was probably ironic almost, I sat down to write something on this yesterday, and immediately I sat down, I had the headline of an email flash up in the bottom of my screen, and it was from my own professional body. I'm a chartered accountant. So it was from the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. And the bit I managed to read in the headline said something like, after every crisis, technology takes off. That's probably quite appropriate for what we're doing now. And we've been through what we could clearly consider a crisis. And so what's that going to do to technology? And the thing we also probably thought about in terms of technology, my thinking in technology in terms of our teaching has become very much in terms of software. So firstly, I should provide a context for the low resources. I thought I'd start off with a bit of what do I see as large, because this is very different for what Elaine sees as large. I was responsible for the intro accounting units, and there was a suite of 3 units, one rather large unit the first year, the undergraduate, but there was 2 other units that piggybacked off that. So we often put them together in the one basket because that gave us some economies of scale. There's common resources we could develop, etc. So the most I had over a whole year, each of those 3 units was offered twice a year, trimester 1 and trimester 2. We had 3 trimesters. The most I had in a year was 2019, and that was around about 1,000 students at census date. So that's what I consider large over a whole year. Also, my focus was much narrower. It's intro accounting, and that makes a lot of things easier with some parts of technology and choosing the technology. So everything I say will not translate as well to other things, but nonetheless it will give you some ideas. Team size, I heard Harsh say Elaine's team was 30. My team was me plus a part-time casual assistant who was actually brilliant, plus some ad hoc help, plus also had a student help in a role we called a progression and engagement mentor. That was a student that had done the unit before, was still a student, and they come on and did some things for us. In total, we would have had a team of less than 2 full-time equivalents. So when I talk about technology, I mostly talk about what I would see as common technology. I'm an accountant, so I've got Excel in there. You may not all have Excel, but common technology, the learning management system, Microsoft suite of things, Excel, Word, used a bit of YouTube, sometimes used some things like Camtasia to help me make YouTubes. Our level of expertise was pretty basic. We were all self-taught users. And when I say we, it's myself and my part-time assistant. And what I was to discuss today, I decided we're mainly centered around Moodle. I know we all got different learning management systems, but they all probably operate in some similar way. The big goal we had was to improve the student experience and use less resources, which are called scalable personalisation. My experience before academia was, as I said, identified myself as an accountant, but my particular expertise was in helping businesses improve their returns. And so that's the thinking that I brought into this. So, you know, I even looked at a unit. I thought, well, how do we increase the returns? So it's, you know, students acquiring more knowledge, probably as measured by their grades, more students passing, and what we use, in fact, less resources. That's what scalable personalisation is. This was probably a 15-minute journey, a 15-year journey for me, so which I'm going to talk about in 15 minutes. So clearly I'm just going to be able to pick some small parts of that. I originally was going to provide a bit more of an overview of what led me there, but I won't spend too much time on that. I believe that's valuable, but you know, the other things might be better return for effort. Move on a slide, I hope. Next slide, right. I will skip a bit down here. Look, I'll go back a step or two. All right. For a framework I used to do this, I adapted a business framework, which was one that I had, I guess, unconscious competence in. I'd used through much of my professional life, but I wanted to adapt that into the higher education space. So I come up with the RENT framework, and that RENT is just an acronym for the various roles that we need to carry out as academics. And that's basically recording. We need to manage the environment. That's the learning environment. We need to work out what needs we need to solve, and we need a team to do that. Now, there's a much more extensive list that what makes those things up, but I'll go straight to effectively probably the learning environment. And I will look here at the assessment flow, which might help me to explain, give me an opportunity to have some practical explanation of what technology I use. So this slide is an overview of the assessment flow in an intro accounting unit. Now this unit was very assessment heavy. It was very work heavy, but very assessment heavy as well as a final exam which students must pass. There was 4 assessable quizzes worth 10 marks each, and 12 tutorial quizzes where the best 10 marks counted, and they were worth a total of 10 marks. So they were 1 mark each. And they fitted, you can see, into sort of 5 areas across the unit. So this slide, you know, provides the basic schematic for the overall assessment flow. Now, there was also some things I will start with that were outside the assessment flow, and that will probably give me an opportunity to explain the different levels of what we did. So all of these assessments used the quiz tool in Moodle. And we use the quiz tool for lots of things, and I might display a few others, but use the quiz tool for doing questionnaires. Use the, you're probably getting a bit like Maslow said, he who is good with a hammer thinks everything is a nail. We probably got pretty good at quizzes, so we used it for lots of things. One of the things we used it for, and I explained that now, is what we called progress activities. Now, they were quizzes that went from pretty basic areas. Well, I'll display what we had progress activities for. Now, here, this will help me explain the progress activities. Here's the learning environment, the map of topic 1, effectively. So students start off with some real basics. You mightn't understand these, but the accounting equation, there's 2 levels of the accounting equation. Then they need to understand accounting elements. Then we see how that fits with financial statements. So progress activities got the name because they got progressively harder. So we would start off with an easy quiz that dealt with the basic accounting equation. And after students had mastered that, we would move them on to quizzes that dealt with the expanded accounting equation. And once they got 100% in that, they'll move on to activities that dealt with the accounting elements. So that's what we called progress activities. Important aspects of the progress activities were feedback. So the feedback, a lot of things in Moodle were pretty clunky, but once you got the hang of it, you could write pretty good feedback to either send students back to do something again, direct them off to the resource bank where there was resources that could be YouTube videos, there could be other activities from undertake, something to read, it could even be forums, podcasts we produce sometimes. So the feedback might direct them to other resources, or say, no, you've done well in this, time to go on to the next activity. So that was a basic use of a quiz purely as a formative task. Now I'll go on to quizzes a bit more. Now quizzes that are mostly formative, but also do have some marks attached to them. And they're what were called tutorial quizzes. So you just saw what was in topic 1. So there would be then a tutorial quiz that students would have to pass. In fact, they've got to get 85% in tutorial quiz 1 before topic 2 will open to them. And so tutorial quiz 1, it's worth 1 mark. Every student gets exactly the same one. Yes, students could find out off someone else what's in the quiz, but there's a number of disincentives to do that. Students also can do this quiz as many times as they want, but they need to prove proficiency in topic 1 before topic 2 will open. Then, what's important with these? A few things that are important in the tutorial quizzes. 1, feedback's really important. If students don't get something, we need to direct them to an appropriate resource. And the other thing is everything goes into the gradebook in Moodle, and then every day, you wouldn't have to do it every day, but every day I downloaded the gradebook into Excel, and I'll show you just something that comes out of the Excel report. Here's just a little bit out. This is what we call the progression pipeline report. Here's something comes out of the progression pipeline report. Now, what does it do for us? It informs us of the progress of the group as a whole, and also the progress of each individual student. And so therefore it plays a really significant role in our intervention hierarchy. Let me explain some of this to you. So you can just see, well, here's another bit of technology. I guess we moved from Moodle to Excel. This is the date, 8th of March. These are how far we're through the trimester. Then here's some other information which didn't become available yet, but I hadn't worked it out. But how many students are repeating in the unit? How many students are repeating from the previous trimester? How many students have completed then each task? Now, there's a number of tasks. We've got the ready to start task. Just make sure that students, this is a task that every student must undertake when they come on to Moodle, or it won't open up to them, and it just tells them about the assessment tasks, about their due dates, what they need to do. But the key thing I wanted to get to at the moment is the tutorial quizzes. It tells us how many students have satisfactorily completed each tutorial quiz. Now I can go to then another page out of this, there's information is drawn from, and find out how each particular student is going. Now, because as I said, we've got 3 levels of intervention. There's automated intervention. So in Moodle, if a student has not completed tutorial quiz 1 by a certain date, they'll have a message directly from Moodle to say something like, "Dear Brent, you need to be aware that you've not completed tutorial quiz 1. It should have been done by yesterday. If you've got any issues, please contact me. Then level 2 was what we call batch. So batch, we would use our progression pipeline report, and we would use this to produce a mail merge to send each student a personalised email to say, again, dear Brent, this is what you've done in the unit so far. We'd also expect you by now to have done this. When you haven't done it, can you let us know when you're going to get it done, or if you've got any issues or you need any help? And if they still do not respond to that, and we wait a bit longer, then it goes to the personalised. We produce a contact report out of this, and we actually contact each student that has not got up to a certain stage. Now, we don't do this for every activity, but we do it for some. We pick ones throughout the trimester. So if we go back now to our assessment flow, tutorial quizzes, they're good for providing feedback, they're good for letting us know how students are progressing, they're good for highlighting the students we need to contact. The blue rectangles are accessible quizzes. They're far more high stakes quizzes, and they take a lot more work. Students, they're worth 10 marks. Students only get to do these once, and so they're a lot more complex for us to set up. We can't have the same quiz for every student. We need to ensure that each student has a different quiz, because we have an on-demand assessment model. An on-demand assessment means a student can do his quiz, any assessment task, whenever they want, provided they've done the prior task. So this takes a bit more planning. And to give you an example of the planning, here's an historical extract from an assessment planning spreadsheet. I won't go through all of this, but here's some things it just tells us. Here's the section, what are question numbers, what's the type of quiz? It's what we call a closed quiz, which is a really versatile type of quiz question. It's good for us to set up journals, ledgers, financial statements. It's really versatile. They're the topics that could come up. So the abbreviations, bad debts, bank reconciliation, inventory. And here's the historical rating. Where do we get the historical rating? We download this from the Moodle reports on each quiz. So Moodle gives pretty good reports. When you've done a quiz, you just download those, and that gives us good reports. Now, that rating will help us understand a few things. One, has every student got a roughly equally difficult quiz? And in this case, in our planning, we looked at this, and you can see those two questions are roughly similar, and those three there are roughly similar, but these two are majorly different. So we had to reorganise that. Then that brings us back probably to about the final thing I will talk about here, because I said I just cut back. I come back again to the spreadsheet, and we can suck out of that a bit later in the trimester. I used that to the progression pipeline and mail merge to produce a progress report for each student. And that progress report will just say, this is what your marks are up to date. This is where you should be at. This is the marks you've accumulated in the unit. And here's your suggested action plan from now on. Now, we'll use if statements in Excel to work out what these activities are. Now, that's the key stuff I'll get to, and I'll just see if there's anything probably significant. I'll look at the end. Yep, thank you, Elaine. I've got that, and I'll just wrap up now, even though there's as I said, more I had originally, but I thought it'd be better to go through one small area to show what we did. But the big lesson out of that is the value of planning, and also in an example of just how we use some really basic technology. There's other things I can answer in the end, but I will now pass over to Elaine so she can have her 20 minutes. And so thank you very much. And I just stopped sharing this.
Thanks, Brent. Can everyone hear me? I'll just assume yes, unless I hear otherwise. So when Brent and I first met, we discussed, how we should do this session, and obviously Brent's talked you through his sort of low resource investment approach, and as Harsh introduced at the start, mine's at the other end of the scale. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit. I'm taking much more of a global view. I was going to share the co-present with one of my team members, but she's unwell today. So I'll cover her bit, but probably in less detail. Maybe if you have questions for Brent's part, you can pop them in the chat. And then I can see there's a couple of members of my team in the audience. So if you've got questions for me while I'm going, you could also pop them in the chat. Maybe they'll answer, or I can answer later. Okay, so let's see. All right. So the first thing that Brent mentioned was about what large meant in his context. And I thought I'd just very quickly tell you a little bit about what large means at University of Sydney Business School. So I actually did a survey when I first started this working in this situation, this context, to ask what people thought. So the literature, I did a sort of a literature review, and we asked our staff to tell us when did they feel like it was a large class. And it was quite interesting because some of them really thought about the tutorial, and whereas some of them thought about the lecture. So the sort of feeling that we got was anything sort of big tutorials and workshops were sort of 80 to 100 strong, and large lectures was sort of anything over sort of 300 students. But the literature doesn't really want to define it. There's lots of different ways of describing what large means. But what we found from our survey of staff was actually in a classroom, any more than 50 students just became too much to manage. Now, when I first started, our large classes were around sort of over 1,000 in a unit. So that's the total number of students in that unit or that subject. But the teaching class size was around 25 in a tutorial. We've since grown. That's definitely changed, and we've looked at models where we have more than one teacher in the class with more students. So I just want to introduce a little bit about my team and about what we do. So we're called the Business CoDesign team, and we are a sort of a group of sub-teams, if you like. So I've got 7 educational developers, 7 learning designers, a media team of about 7 people, actually 7 or 8. And we've got some members of the team who do solely focused on evaluation and research. And then we've got the unit coordinator who we work closely with on all of our unit design and development. So they're our subject matter experts. And I've noticed there's actually a circle missing off this slide, and that's our students. So our student interns actually really work closely with us in the design process, as well as our current students and our alumni. But we do actually have students working as media interns and as learning design interns. So yes, we are a very big team, which can have its pros and its cons, and Brent and I were talking about that, and when we come to the end, we'll share some of the similarities and differences with you. So a little bit about connected learning at scale. This was the brainchild, I guess, of Associate Professor Peter Bryant, and he came up with a very simple framing. So this is the framework we use. It's very simple, and it's really about the connection. So we understood that our students really, when they're in these huge cohorts, they lack. They feel isolated. They don't feel that even though there's 1,000 of them or 2,000 of them in some of our bigger units, they didn't connect. So we wanted to look at ways to help them connect with the discipline, with the knowledge, connect with each other through the active and collaborative learning, and then also to connect with feel part of the university, but also the wider society, through giving them authentic opportunities to learn and be assessed. And so we kind of wrapped this up with designing our units around global, local, and even personal challenges. In terms of the approach that we take as a team, because there's lots of us, there's lots of moving parts, we do tend to follow this sort of approach, which is influenced, I guess, by design thinking, design-based research, and connected learning. So we've got these sort of 5 stages where we try to explore or ideate what the problem is with that unit, where what needs fixing or where they wanted to improve. Then we do a plan, or we do some design work. We might test something out before we do a full implementation and an evaluation. So this sort of cycle can, we've come up with these sort of, we use this terminology of deep touch. So a class unit for us means working with our academic partners across 3 semesters. Usually that could be a whole semester of design and develop, and then a semester of implement, and then a second semester of implement, or it could be fully explore, plan, build, implement all in one semester, and then another semester, and then the final semester is a very light sort of evaluation. So depending on each unit that we work with, depends on which part of this cycle we approach. So in terms of our scope, when I first started, I was told it would be 14 units to develop across 3 years. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. And then 2020 happened, and we all know what happened there. And so suddenly we've found ourselves, we're into our 3rd year, although we did get off to a very slow start in 2019 because probably spent most of that year recruiting the team. As you can see, we only started with 4 units. But we're up to around 25 at this point, and of those sort of deep touch, full cycles of development. So where those numbers are, I know they don't add up to 25. I'm not an accountant, but I do know that. But that's because they overlap. So those 4 class units that we started with in 2019, they were in their 2nd cycle in 2020, for example. So just a little bit about just some facts and figures. I'll rush through these slides very quickly. But we also, in 2020, because of the whole COVID and the pandemic, we flipped to become a support unit, really, and work with our academic colleagues to get them all online. And so then we introduced this parallel project, which we called Lighttouch, which was really just about moving big groups of people and units around topics. So whether they wanted to learn more about chunking their content, and we'd run some workshops and then give them some one-on-one consultations. And we've done a similar kind of thing in 2021. So these are units that are non-class. So then they're probably still large units, but not necessarily. We're very lucky to have a fantastic media team. We have 3 media studios, bespoke just for the business school. And so that team has also grown, doubled, tripled in size, and we've got some great media interns who help us develop content. And then our learning design team, in terms of technology, some of the things that we consider as learning technologies are things like H5P, Genially, for example, to create interactive activities in the Canvas site. As most of you know, if you use Canvas, it's a very plain and boring LMS, and you really need to have plugins, or you need and this is where the resourcing comes in. You know, you need licenses, and because we're project funded, we're able to purchase these licenses and build all of these assets. And that is an issue that we're going to have to think about moving forward once the project funding is stopped. How do we continue to implement these kind of technologies in our classes? And then one other project that's been running alongside of our design and develop of our class project is this idea of looking at the spaces for principle. So principle 2 is active and connected learning, and we've been trying to think about, you know, these are 2 pictures from 2 rooms that we piloted where we got new furniture, and we had to rethink about how students interact, because again, thinking about this connection. And so we wanted to give within one space, different types of opportunities to learn. So you might actually, at the beginning of class, the lecturer might need to do a little bit of lecturing and tell students about, you know, set the scene, for example. And there might be some large whole class activity that you want them to do. But then there might also be opportunities to go into smaller focus groups around tables, around computer screens, and then possibly like a final, you know, whole class back to the teacher. So, you know, this is something, and again, because of lockdown this year, this project's also had to go a little bit on the back burner. We'll hopefully reinvigorate it at the start of next year. But these classrooms are probably around 60 to 90 people. But what we are actually looking at is a 400 seat space. So in the sort of diagram on the top left there, we're really looking for how we can take the whole cohort or half the cohort, depending on the size, say 400 students, say what you would have had in a lecture, but then have them move around and use the space in a different way to do different type of activities, rather than having to separate, have a lecture and then have a tutorial or a workshop. You could do it all as one. So another benefit, I guess, of having such a big team and being resourced in terms of funding is that we are able to have educational evaluators and researchers who help us collect data from our students and from our staff who we work with, from the tutors. We also collect learning analytics from the Canvas site, and then we're able to get support with analysing these, and that can make us a lot more agile in terms of building what we the findings back into the next cycle of design. All right, so this is where I was going to hand over to Stephanie to introduce you to a couple of examples from her unit, but I will just try and do her justice. Basically she worked, so this is one example of an undergraduate quantitative unit, and sorry. So whilst, okay, so when we talk about innovation, one of the things that I always struggle with is when people say, oh, you shaped a 2-hour lecture into 12 weeks of content. Well, we've been doing that for ages. So I think really when you talk about innovation, the University of Sydney Business School is very traditional. It was when I started. It was a very traditional model of a 2-hour lecture, for example, and go off to a 1-hour tutorial. And actually, depending on where you're at on that innovation scale, really impacts on how you move. Or so the movement away from a 2-hour lecture is actually quite innovative for some people. And so again, in terms of technologies and things that people use, whether they're determined as innovative is quite a subjective viewpoint. So in this unit, one of the great things that they did was to try and utilize student data. So they did an exercise on plastic production. So they were trying to collect data to then do statistical modeling or analysis on. And so the students actually provided their own data, and in that way they felt a lot more connected with the subject matter. It wasn't just us giving them a data set. They actually got to create their own data set, which was great. And you can see from some of the student, skipped on, some of the student feedback there. Sorry, there's a lot of information on the slide. I won't go through it all. But one of the markers, I guess, for success for us is, you know, we call it USS, but it's your standard student feedback survey at the end of semester. We were seeing really great improvements over the 3 cycles of design and development in student feedback and in terms of scores, which unfortunately are the way many units are measured these days. The second example was a marketing example, and this is a postgraduate unit where, again, they used to teach it in a 3-hour lecture. The lecture was probably interactive. It wasn't just the teacher talking for 3 hours, but it was in a lecture theatre, so, you know, you're quite restricted in terms of the active and the movement. Not that you can't do it, but by splitting this into a 1.5-hour online and 1.5-hour interactive workshop, we're really able to utilize space better and also timing. So for example, this used to be taught in sort of tutorials of 25, so one teacher of 25. So I think there were around 500 students in this marketing unit, and so there were around sort of 20 tutorials each week. But by moving into a 90-seat space, we were with 3 teachers, so we went up a little bit in our staff-student ratio from 25 to 30 to 1, but then we had 90 students with 3, and we were able to do much more in terms of actually getting all the students getting through the tutorials actually in one day, which doesn't sound like an amazing thing, but for the unit coordinator, it meant that they could communicate with the whole cohort who are all in lockstep. They're all getting their tutorial on the same day rather than 20 tutorials spread across the week. And if you run quizzes or you run different activities, some people will be ahead of other people. So even that sort of small change was really innovative. And I know Brent talked a little bit about using Excel to contact students and that mail merge kind of idea. And we've got a system at Sydney called SRES or SRES, which you may have heard about, student something and engagement system, student response and engagement system. And that we use that in a similar way to be able to pick up on students' activity and then give them personalized sort of feedback. In this unit, they used SRES for students to do reflection and then collect all of those reflective pieces and give them feedback on their reflections. And again, even this replacing a final exam maybe doesn't sound like such a big deal, but in the business school, for us, it's getting. We see that as a really great win if we encourage people to think about more different ways of assessing. And again, students were quite positive in their feedback on some of these changes. And then there's some other kind of, I'll come to I'll leave that, I'll come to that later. But the last thing I just wanted to tell you about was a little bit about how we are now trying to bring a lot of what we've learned together. So we are a big team and we're all learning different things, and how do you share across a team such as that? I'd never mind share with the wider community, but how do we all keep on top of what we're learning? So Stephanie, I'd like us to acknowledge also Stephanie and Dewa, Stephanie Wilson and Dewa Wardak for leading this, another sort of sub project to this, but it's about how we, the outputs of our project. So this is sort of based on the work of Alexander, who's in the design space, is quite well known in terms of patterns. And what we did, it's also based on the work of Peter Goodyear. And what we've started doing is trying to synthesize what are the problems, what are we seeing across the many units that we're redesigning. And then from there, we're trying to, we did sort of a big, and again, this is the benefit of having such a great big group with lots of, you know, inquisitive minds, academics and professional staff, learning designers all working together to think about, these are our sort of 3 principles, if you like, but we also know there's another big elephant in the room with large-scale teaching, and that's the administration of these classes and the restrictions that come about by the huge size. And so I'm not expecting you to read that slide, but you know, we started brainstorming what were some of the issues, and then from there we started thinking about, well, what are the candidates for these patterns? How can we, which of the units that we've worked on exhibit some of these patterns, and how can we then start to share those patterns with other people to make that useful? We can't say you must do this and you must do that, because obviously everybody's context is different. So we've started to create, we've created these a pattern template, if you like, based on the work of Professor Huber from KU University. We've modified these, we've had lots of brainstorming sessions within the team to fit this template to the work that we're doing and the findings that we've got, so that we can develop a pattern language and start to share that more widely. And if you're interested in reading more, you can have a look on the, we're going to be publishing these on our blog. So CDRG is the CoDesign research group, and again, another benefit of having such a big group is that we're all researchers, you know, half the group are academics, and even some of our professional staff are really interested in research, and we get together and share and write and produce generate more ideas for that we're posting on the blog. So do have a look at that. All right, that's it from me. Brent, I think I whizzed through that in 20 minutes. Hope it wasn't too fast. So I've got one last slide, and this is one that Brent and I met about just over a week ago, just to talk through our two presentations, and we were starting to think about where are the, okay, we're both completely differently resourced, but were there any similarities? Obviously there's big differences, but I thought the similarities list was quite interesting. Brent, do you want to say anything?
Well, yeah, I can talk through mine and then talk through yours, because this was really interesting. The further we went on, the more important we found was to invest time in documenting what we did, instead of just working it out, doing it, because you'd come back the next year to do the same thing and you forget what it was, or even you might come back a few months later, or if you want to get someone else in the team. Even though we're only a team of effectively 2 people, we spent most of Wednesday morning was just meeting, planning what we were going to do. That seems weird for so few people, and it wouldn't be the whole time necessarily in the Wednesday morning. It might be go out for coffee, we might go and do a bit, then come back and meeting again. It was probably an active meeting. It wasn't always here's a 3-hour meeting with an agenda, but we'd sit together and work for 3 hours. We got, and I probably could show some of the things I did have earlier, was we try to work out some templates to do things again, which I guess relates back to the documentation earlier on. And I imagine this is something common to all of us, is how do you get the support in your organisation that you need, because everyone's got their own things they need to be working on, and especially if you want to change something, that gets a bit tougher. And look, I got a big break when the uni needed me to do something with the unit, and that was in 2018, and that gave me the opportunity to introduce my on-demand assessment. I thought, well, yep, I can do that, and this is what I'll need to make it work. So until then, I had really no support to do that, and that just meant the students could finish the unit if they'd done all the work within as early as, well, probably 5 weeks was the earliest that someone had finished. And that, so, it was hard to get that, and in the end, I'd spend a lot of time probably going out to coffee with people, because that's how I got support effectively. Elaine, have you got anything to...
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting when, it was funny when Brent mentioned that he had project meetings on a Wednesday morning. I was like, oh, so do we. Wednesday mornings. So yeah, I mean, obviously with such a big team, like, we do spend a lot of time in meetings because we want to keep across. So we have a whole team meeting once a month, and then we have the sort of the class project lead meetings once a fortnight, and then we have research meetings once a month, and then we have evaluation meetings once a month. Oh, sorry, our research meetings have gone to bi-monthly. Our evaluation meetings are monthly. So just, and then obviously each of our educational developers who leads a project or 3, they have their own project meetings with their learning designers and their unit coordinators, probably on a weekly basis. And then the learning designer team have a learning designers meeting, and then the media team, I know they do a daily stand-up meeting. So, we're such a great big team, but to keep everybody abreast of everything that's going on, that's really important. And that's where we came back to this idea about documentation. One of the things that we've invested in our team is the use of a tool called monday.com, and we use that to sort of, keep records. It's kind of like a project management tool, I guess, but we use it for everything within the BCD team, so we can all see. Obviously, we've got shared drives of folders and resources, but we've also got this sort of place where we document and keep notes and that kind of thing. That last point that we put in terms of similarities, in terms of support, we also discussed how being in a faculty, it's not always easy to get central support, especially with technologies, because they, you know, the technologies are usually owned and run and supported by central units, by ICT teams, that kind of thing. And often that sort of slowed us down, or we certainly in my team had to work very hard at building these relationships with the central technology support teams as well.
I'd like to add one other thing there, and I don't know whether there's a similarity or difference. There's probably a bit more of a difference, but after a while, I guess I learned to avoid some of the newer technologies that come along that people had invested in, because you'd spend some time in learning how to do them, and then, you know, 2 years down the track, we could find the license was expired and not enough people had taken it up, and we don't want to continue on with that. Or there's a newer thing that's come out that does that better. That's why I probably tended to rely a bit more on the technologies like the learning management system, like Excel, that had been about for ages, or stuff that I was happy to go out and buy myself, like Camtasia Studio for making, you know, improving my videos.
Yeah, so I think one of the things with us with our project is, like I said, we've been very lucky to have funding. So we've been able to buy all of these licenses for different, like Genially, for the Kahoot license, for example, and trial. So I feel like we've spent a couple of years like trialing lots of different things and working out, you know, what works for who and when. Not that the technology should be leading us at all, but at least we now feel that we're getting a much better feel. It's very hard when you're given a new technology. It's nice and shiny and new, and you think, oh yeah, we could do this, this, and this, and then you iron out the wrinkles as you go. So we're almost like piloting, and now we're reaching a point where we've got to be much more sustainable, think about the transferability once the project funding stops. What then? So what's going to be easier for, you know, our academic colleagues to maintain themselves, which technologies have been more user-friendly, if you like. And so now we're at a point of starting to really evaluate all of those tools and try and cut back and see if we can have a much smaller pool to choose from. I wonder whether we should open up to any questions. I know we've still got about 7 minutes left. If anyone wants to either shout out or any questions about what we've said, or any other thoughts or things to add. I mean, that you might be in the middle between Brent and I. You might be sort of, I feel like I'm highly resourced, Brent's low resource. Is there anyone who feels they're somewhere in the middle? They want to share anything?
Actually, I'd be also interested if any people have found some good resources that they have used, some good technology. Like you mentioned Kahoots there, and that is something, in fact, that we, you know, have used. So, which I found as a good thing to use.
And I think often that will depend on your learning management system. You know, so you're on Moodle, Brent?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Moodle.
I was, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, got some sort of inbuilt, some good tools that are already inbuilt, whereas with Canvas, I find everything has to be an add-on, everything has to be an extra pretty much, because the native tools of Canvas are pretty basic. So if you want to be innovative or do something a little bit different, you really do need to trial something new. We just had Flipgrid integrated into Canvas, or LTI did, and one of my co-workers and I were teaching. We've been trialing it with the students to see how that goes with them. And like most tools, if it's seamless and they can use, it's intuitive and they can use it without having to do 3 logins, it's always more beneficial. Any questions? Anyone want to raise anything or ask us to clarify anything? Joe, you have your mic on. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to share my video, but it's not working.
Oh.
Hi, Elaine, and hi, Brent. Thank you for sharing. I feel like I'm a little bit in the middle. So we have a lot of the institution challenges, like Brent's explaining, and never do we get to the big project that you've got to, Elaine. Really curious around your frequency of meetings and that sort of thing. I've made a lot of notes around that. Something that we don't do perhaps as well as the different meetings for all the different purposes, where you said you had an evaluation meeting which was different to your research team meeting. I thought that was excellent. But in relation to your tech, I've had a lot of issues with institutional licenses not carrying through, such as H5P. So you tend to be going back to what can we do that's safe within the LMS, which is a little bit of a shame.
It is. But it's what you do after a while, isn't it? When you've had a few times you've invested energy in doing something and then, well,
Yeah.
no, we thought that was a good idea and there's other ideas we have now.
Yeah, so we've used, I haven't tried Monday.com, I'm going off to give that a look, but I have been using Microsoft Planner for all my project management, and that's working really well. Having the whole Microsoft suite for the students as well, it's been quite handy. Yeah, I've really got quite a bit out of this today, so thanks heaps.
One of the things that my team have done, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this out loud, but it's about sharing licenses. So, you know, we've bought a license for it. So we've got 10 disciplines across our business school. So we share a license for that discipline. And if there's enough people in that discipline, then the discipline will agree to take on the payment of the license for that tool. So sometimes we feel like, and I'm sure we all know this, we all wear many hats in our roles. Sometimes I feel like I'm a bit of a salesman in terms of trying to drum up enthusiasm to try a new tool so that we can at least say, well, there's this many people who are interested in using it, so we can justify the license cost. And often, yeah,
love that idea too.
I don't really love it. I don't want to be a salesman, but I also don't want to waste money on just 1 unit or 2 units using something. But then again, when you're at scale and you weigh up the cost benefit analysis, you know, it might only be two units, but that could be 4,000 students getting value out of that tool.
Yeah,
Which is
also
a big
we don't
number,
want to lose
isn't
the
it?
innovation. We don't want to lose the innovation out of our work either. You know, you want to. I liked that because it allows us to keep thinking, pushing boundaries. Sorry, Brent.
Yeah, well, if you got, you know, you're talking about 4,000 students, that's a lot of money that, you know, A, you need to deliver value for, and B, you need to protect the income of. So it's worth investing in. From a business perspective, maybe not from a university perspective. I sometimes think that people don't fully appreciate how much the big units contribute to a university.
Yeah. I think there's some crazy figure that, I don't know, something like our program, our Masters of Commerce is 12% of the income of the university or something like that.
Wow.
So it is quite a lot in one program.
Wow. That's a lot. Well, we've probably got to 4.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you very much, and thank you, Elaine. It was great to have a few chats as well. That was good. And if anyone's got any questions, I think I don't know. Actually, I don't know where my email is, but bye.
I did have it on the front slide, but you could drop it.
Oh, good. Righto, it's there.
I'm sure we're easy to find. You can just Google us.
Yeah. Righto.
Thanks,
Goodbye, everyone.
Great to chat.